There is another benching of a top 5 pick less than 1,000 days ago, as Anthony Richardson will be heading to the bench, and Joe Flacco will be coming in as the starter for the Colts. This comes after a rough loss with the division on the first place in the division against Houston, a rough day for AR, and of course, as we joked about, the tap out situation as well, where tapped out because he was tired, said he was tired afterwards, told everyone he was tired afterwards. And then now a few days later, it's gonna be Joe Flacco fever in Indianapolis, and there's a lot to unpack here. We got a lot of different ways to go out on this one, so we're gonna go one step at a time. Kelsey, I'm gonna go to you first. We're gonna focus in basically chronological logical order. What are your thoughts when you see a quarterback tap out for a play? It's a 3rd and goal from the 22, yes. You ran around, yes, but the quarterback tapping his helmet to come out for a play. What are your thoughts as a former offensive lineman who used to have to run 20 yards on a pulling toss play just for it to get called back for the backside guys holding?
Yeah. Okay. So, despite what you just said, I got to be honest. I am okay with Anthony Richardson doing it specifically. And everybody's gonna be like, "Oh, how dare he? He's not an offense." No, let me be very clear. As you mentioned, the situation 3rd and goal from the 22. Anthony Richardson's not the guy you need playing quarterback in that situation. He just got hit by a 300 pounder. It literally just pulled him off of him, stood back up after running around. And then you're going to go ask him with his wild accuracy to go and try to score a touchdown on 3rd and goal from the 22. I trust any other quarterback. And that's no offense to Anthony Richardson, but that's just where he's at in his career trajectory right now. We're also talking about a 22-year-old. We're not talking about a 26-year-old that's been in the league for 4 years. We're not talking about somebody who's well seasoned and healthy. We're talking about a guy who just came off of season-ending injury last year, who's missed a couple weeks already this year, who's literally 2 weeks removed from coming back, and now you're going to be like, oh, it's offensive that he took a break. I don't hate it. Honestly, it was, I believe, at the 12th play of the drive, if I'm not mistaken. He'd already scrambled twice before on the drive. That one, a situation where there are times, and especially, I've talked about it with Tua, you got to know which battles to fight. 3rd and 22, know your own weakness. I have no problem tapping out. I do have a problem, on the other hand, admitting that's why you tapped out, because that's just sounds childish. And everybody's like, oh, well, at least he's on. No. I don't need you to be honest to the media. I need you to be honest to your teammates and apologize to your teammates, because that's a terrible situation to put them in. But don't be honest to the media. I'm sorry. I'm sitting here, and you and I both have media conversations regularly, and you've both been a part of the media at some point in time in our careers. I don't care that if somebody's not honest to me as a media person. That just doesn't bother me, especially an athlete. I don't need you to be 100% honest with me. I don't need coaches to be 100% honest with me. I need you to be relatively honest. But in that situation, I don't blame you if you're not honest to me. I don't want to see honesty in that situation. And that's where I have more of a problem with this than anything. Like, just, oh man, it was a play call. It was a play calling decision. That's all you need to say. You don't need to be like, oh yeah, well, I got tired. Like, let's pump the brakes there, Anthony. Like, let's not go down that route. But as far as tapping out, in this specific situation, it doesn't bother me. Now, if he was fully healthy, this is week 8, and this is what he's doing, that's a bigger problem. But he's not fully healthy. You can kind of tell that in the way he throws and the way he kind of carries himself and trying to run over people. He's not doing it with the same type of impact as he once was. There's hesitancy there, and I don't ever need a player being hesitant. And I've talked about that before with Tom Brady. Why I felt like he should retire a year earlier is when you start thinking about things like that with injuries, retirement, anything like that, you lose a step, and now you're thinking and then reacting instead of just reacting. And that's, for an athlete, that's, I'm not going to say a death sentence, but that is a quick end to a long career. So,
Oh, it? Oh, we got a lot we're gonna get into this, so I'm gonna try and keep it centralized here before we go into the broad strokes sort of it. Him tapping out, all you had to do is say, like, the man hit my leg and my hamstring tightened up or something. Like, you can't say
yeah,
it like you said. Like, that's the one thing you can't say. Like, fatigue will make cowards of us all. We all know, like, this situation, but, like, that's the one thing that every athlete can control is getting tired. Like, that's the one thing you could truly control. So you can't let that as a 22-year-old, like you said, like, God, would I give that my 22-year-old legs again? Like, my goodness, like,
Yeah.
that's, like, the one thing you can't say, and you can't even tell your coaches or teammates. You have to say he's on the injury report for a wrist injury right now on his left wrist. He was shaking out of the back, my wrist, or he hit my knee and it tightened up or something, or just call a timeout and say your helmet can't, like, you can't hear the play, let the clip play clock drain
Or
your
he knocked the wind out of me. Like, that would have been a
literally anything, yeah.
and it's possible that's what he meant, and obviously, he just said, "I had to catch my breath." Like, okay.
Mm. Like, it's a bad look, you can't say that, you really can't do it either, like, we see Lamar running around for his life all the time, we see guys running around all the time for their life, we see offensive linemen, you never see Jason Kelcey tap out to be like, "Man, I'm sorry, I can't do the tush push this play, my back hurts," like, so you can't really do it, but as a young kid, you'll get grace for that, I guess, it's like, "Alright, a child, and this wasn't 4th and goal to win the game," so it's annoying, you weren't gonna convert that 3rd and goal from that spot anyway, it was gonna be a handoff almost guaranteed regardless. So, like, it's not the end of the world, and I don't think this will get to the larger thing that we'll be talking about here in just a second, but I do you can't do that, and it's a check mark in the wrong box, but it's not a kill shot. Like, it's not the end of the world, and I think there's a lot more that goes into what we're gonna talk about in a second, but at the same time, you can't do it, you live and you learn. Just don't do it again, basically. Just don't do it again,
Yeah.
more or less at this point. Like, I think it was overblown a little bit, for sure, which we're talking about it now, so we're contributing to that, obviously, which is why gotta be smarter than that not to say that, which 22-year-old kid, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot there for sure, but it does lead to the larger issue of which now he's gonna be heading to the bench for what seems like the foreseeable future, according to coaches. And it's been a rocky season for him, we will say politely, and so much so that right when it happened, we went ahead and put out a Twitter poll saying like, "Hey, do you think they made the right decision?" And kind of an outstanding percentage here of oh, 75 3 to 1 saying absolutely they made the right decision benching AR5 for Flacco. And I kind of circle back to what we said is I don't think the tap out was the full reason for it. Like, I don't think it's just that. I think there's a lot that goes into it. I have a checklist of things I'm gonna run down, so I'm gonna give you a moment to kind of say, like, hey, what are your what are your thoughts when we look at this too? Like, what are your thoughts on Joe Flacco becoming the guy? And what do you think this means for Anthony moving forward? Because I personally don't think this is the kill shot to his career. I think
Yeah.
it's not the end by any means whatsoever. It's not, "Oh, we're done with him now, we're moving on." I think it might be the opposite, but I'll let you go because 'cause I've been rambling for a few.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. I hate when I see young quarterbacks get thrust into this position and they're like, all right, that's our guy. And then he gets benched and it's immediate like, oh, it's over. The dude is 22 years old. Fun fact, your frontal lobe does not fully develop until you're 25 years old as a male. He has three
Depending on
more
how many
years
shots to
until
the head you've taken, it could be later too.
yeah, and he has three more years to go until he fully matures brain brain wise. I'm not saying he's not intelligent, but it does build extra intelligence into you as well. You have 3 more years to grasp a lot of difficult concepts easily. A little more agile brain there. Your brain is no longer the way it is. That's it's still agile. It still can make changes, and as a athlete, that's a huge advantage. Seeing young athletes being benched early on in their career doesn't bother me, and it never will. And it's how it should be. In certain cases, I don't mind seeing a quarterback go out there and play right now. See it in Washington. It's effective because of right now. As I said in the my prediction in the preseason was he is so dynamic, it doesn't change things long term until people get tape on him. Then things will start changing. Now you see it here in Indy where AR's this is really his rookie year. Let's not kid ourselves about this. This is his rookie year. He's already missed games again this year after missing a whole season last year, basically. And, you know, now we're at the point where, okay, let's actually evaluate where he's at. And then we have a competent backup in Joe Flacco, a more than competent backup, a guy who, for all intents and purposes, is the reason the Browns had any semblance of a season last year. And again, he wanted to be in Cleveland. They didn't want to keep him. So he goes to Indy and he agrees to sit behind AR, which he's had this situation before in his career where he has gone behind a young, agile, running quarterback and made the best of it. That's one of the best seasons he's had is when Lamar first got drafted. And now you see it again. He's coming in spot situations, playing exceptional or above average. And now you have him coming in again for the Colts. And I like this. And as far as AR's career long term, it doesn't bother me. I think he's going to grow from this. I don't think there's a better guy for him to learn from as Joe Flacco in this situation because Joe Flacco's a guy who has been benched and brought back so many times now. I've lost track. And even Lamar will go back and talk about his first year with Joe on the team. It changed the way he thought about football, and that's just kind of how those veteran leaders do. And especially somebody who is a pure pocket passer like Joe Flacco is, the things he can teach AR is indispensable for his future talent, for his future growth. And that's quick reads of the field, how to get the ball out quick, what to look for on defenses in the NFL that are unique from a college aspect. We're not let's again AR has only played 13 college or 13 games up until he got to the NFL in college. 13. You can't grow that fast in 13 games. So he's going to do a lot of growing while he's on the bench for however long that is, and he's going to, I hope, learn and come back from this even better, which is the best situation that can be asked for. And if he was really the guy that should be drafted where he was drafted at by the Colts, they're going to expect him to be able to grasp and learn and grow. And it's not going to be a situation where he's asking out by the end of the year. It's not like that. It's like this is going to be a good growth moment for him. Let him have his Jordan Love seasons where he just sits behind Aaron Rodgers. Like this is a perfect situation for Anthony Richardson in my eyes.
There's a lot of different scenarios I'm gonna go on the mini rant for because every time we see something dramatic like this, what I like to do just for fun is not for to find out what's going on, just because I'm always curious, is I like to dip into that fan base's X or Facebook pages just to see what the overall reaction is. Like when Jameis Winston came in and Deshaun went down, when Bryce Young got benched, that sort of things. I like to gauge the overall feel just because like our poll can't reach everybody, unfortunately. We unfortunately do not have 8 billion subscribers yet. But I thought it'd be kind of cool to dip in there. It is absolute chaos there. It is almost worse than the Browns with the Deshaun discourse. Everyone is losing their mind over it, which is crazy because, like you mentioned, he was the youngest starting quarterback to start the year for the second year in a row. And you look at the kids coming out, he is younger than Carson Beck. I think he's barely older than Cam Ward, Shadua, and those guys as well. Like he might be the youngest
Well,
starting quarterback next year if he's starting next year. Like there's a
yeah,
very real possibility of this. So it's not over at this point, but we're gonna look at some of the scenarios of how we got to this point. The worst case scenario is Jim Irsay did what Jim Irsay does and just kind of meddled in there and said, I'm tired of seeing inaccurate passes, brother, and forced it on everybody. That's the worst case scenario. And then it's a confidence killing situation. I think a middle ground could be they're 4-4 looking at the playoffs like this 44% completion, this incredibly erratic play, which leads to time of possession. They are losing each game 40 minutes to 20 minutes, give or take. They are not on the field. The offense is not sustainable because Anthony can hit a 60-yard bomb to Alec Pierce while falling down, but he can't hit a flat route on a pick to Josh Downs. It's a very roller coaster ride, which we all expected.
yeah.
So I think that's part of it is like, all right, this is not sustainable. Let's see what happens when we could just pick up a couple first downs before the fourth quarter. They can't. Halftime he was 2 of 15 for 81 yards and a touchdown. And right up until that pick. Like there's a lot of insustainability too. So I think that was the biggest thing is they need to try and steady the ship a little bit. Obviously, no one could you knew this with AR. We talked about it's kind of his rookie season. The downside is for him, it's his rookie season. For everyone else, we are 24 games in, and he has not played half of those. So I think there's probably a little bit of stress there from this goes back to the Jim Irsay thing of like, what are we doing here? We said we'd invest some time into him. It has been a year and a half, and he looks worse now than he did last year, which partially goes back to what you mentioned with Jane Daniels. So I'm glad you mentioned that. That offense, and this is not insulting, it is stupid simple as far as they made it so easy for him because that's what good coaches do and good offense coordinators do. They eased him in to start the year. You look at his passing charts, it's the first read, it's quick, it's a wrap route, it's very easy for him. And then they slowly expand as he got to go. They're like, if you don't like it, use your legs because as Jane Daniels is still one of the most dynamic quarterbacks with his legs. They tried that with Anthony last year, and that's why he looked good in Spurs. The problem was he broke every other time they did it. So you can't even utilize you can see it this year, they're kind of reluctant to utilize that part of his game to the same way. They'd rather him scramble than call those designed runs, and he's reluctant to scramble, you could see as well. He'll scramble when he needs to. They'll call it in those key moments like that 3rd and 1, maybe they'll call like a quarterback around the backside, something like that. They'll still use it. But I think those injuries really reluctant, which once again neuters the offense, which then makes him have to do the thing that he can't really do very well, which is sit back there, process, and let it rip and see it, anticipate all of those good things. He was not as bad against the Texans as the stats say. He threw some absolute dimes that were not caught. Sometimes there was just good plays. Other times, Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson were in his lap immediately. So I think it's partially performance, partially they kind of looked at it as like, all right, he needs reps. As you mentioned, he's played 15 games. Unfortunately, he's not ready for those live reps is what I think it is. I think they kind of realize that like, okay, we're sending him out to slaughter. We're going to kill his confidence if he keeps going 9 of 32. Like that is not good for your confidence either. He needs practice reps and practice time preparing through the week, which he didn't get last year because he was injured. He was rehabbing, wasn't even with the team until like November or something like that too, because you don't get a chance to see those day in and day outs like you mentioned. So I do think it's not the end of the world. I think that is kind of the main goal, and the reason they said that is they didn't wanna leave an expectation of him coming in like a week or something like that in case he's not ready. That's why I think they said it's Flacco season. So I do think it's not the end of the world. There's still plenty of time. If they are officially out on him per se, like it is as bad as Colts Twitter would make you think it is right now, then people need to get fired because you didn't spend money to win now. You built the team to grow, and you gave up midway in the season at this point. So if that's the case, then there's an issue, and Justin Fields is going to be the quarterback for Indy last year, and they're going to continue recycling the bringing in a new free agent every year, or they'll bring back Flacco or something goofy. So there's a lot that we don't know behind the scenes, which I think contributes to this. I also think part of it might be that immaturity. Going back to you can't just say I'm tired, man, and giggle in that post game press conference, then defend yourself saying I'm a great quarterback. I just do it differently. Can't double down. Quarterback gets all the blame, and they get all of the reward. That's why you just gotta say, "Great, I gotta do better." Same old song and dance. You gotta be a gluten. You gotta how do I want to say this? You gotta be about as exciting as plain non-fat Greek yogurt in those situations. You gotta have the most milk toast answers you can possibly. Maybe a joke here or there, but not like that. And I think part of it might be the preparation too. Like maybe he's doing something in the preparation that's not that the coaches don't love. And at this point, they just finally that was the straw that snapped the camel's back. Or maybe he's the opposite of Tim Tebow, who he looks elite in practice, but something is happening in the games where it's not quite translating. So they're like, all right, let's take a step back, see what can happen, learn from Joe Flacco, 'cause he'll never be able to do what Anthony can do. But Anthony can maybe learn to do 75 of what Joe does that as far as like ID pre-snap, find those blitzing hot reads, which is part of the reason he was under siege against the Texans. He misses the hot read that's him all the quite frequently because he hasn't played. He hasn't got a chance to learn. So I would say there's a lot of different ways to do it. I do think the maturity along with the just the play, everything kind of adds up. I mean, he still has fewer touchdowns in his career than Jaden Daniels has already, like total touchdowns, if I'm not mistaken. It hasn't been good. And you agreed to take the lumps, but I think at this point, the lumps, it's like, all right, we are going to be a detriment to keep him out there at this point, not just to the team, but to him. And who's to say he's not the starter next year and this doesn't help? That's what I'm curious. If you are out on him, if that's what they're saying, people need to get fired. Go trade for Zach Wilson or something to back up Joe Flacco. I don't know. Go make a move, do something. I don't know what the answer is if they're going to do that. I just don't think they're out on him. I think I think it's something in the middle. I don't think it's catastrophe. Just like I don't think it was Jim Irsay being Jim Irsay. I don't think Jeff Saturday or Pat McAfee is about to walk into the stand out of the stand and start coaching, or at least I sure hope not. The last thing that team needs is Pat McAfee as a coach. And the last thing they need to do is listen to Pat McAfee as well. I know he's the voice former Colts player, but they don't need to be listening to him. His job is to be a little dramatic, but don't listen to him necessarily. So, frankly, I think they'll be fine. I don't know if this makes them a playoff team. If it does, you're staring at maybe a 10-win 7 seed. We'll see because the running game also isn't as good with Flacco. Granted, we haven't seen it with Jonathan Taylor, so we'll see. But I'm going to say though, I think they'll be fine. I think Anthony's still going to be the starter next year, assuming he handles this well. If he does not handle it well, let's say this quote unquote kills his confidence, like everyone talks about, then they're cooked. And if this kills his confidence, I don't know if he was going to be the guy regardless. They haven't done a lot to help him necessarily, too. Those receivers dropped a lot of passes in that game. So I hope it wasn't just because of that game. That's another issue because there's 3 touchdowns that were taken off the board. So I'm gonna use the optimistic approach of it's more or less just to give him time to reset. He also did just have the birth of his first child in the offseason. So that is a lot. Your rookie season, quote unquote. Lots of expectations coming off an injury. And now you have at home too. You know, when you have a young baby at home, there's not as much sleep as you'd like. There's no way to avoid it. So there's a lot on his plate. This could just be a take a step back moment. And maybe the tap out was part of that. He just wasn't thinking clearly. And the coach was like, okay, we need to give him time. So when he's out there, he is able to think clearly. Like you mentioned, frontal lobe, all that sort of thing. So I'm gonna take the approach of they got a plan, and I don't think he's toast, but we need to quit comparing to Josh Allen. Like that's just you're comparing to the ultimate alien. Maybe just let's relax with that because Josh Allen also played the entire rookie year. So when you compare their 10 games, that is Josh Allen's true rookie year, not a year and a half later. And then when you compare a year and a half Josh Allen to a year and a half Anthony Richardson, that's 20 games compared to 8. And Josh Allen didn't leave 5 of those games. So, like, you can't really compare him. He was the most, quote, unquote, "inexperienced," quote, unquote, "raw" quarterback not named Trey Lance ever arguably to be drafted in the top 5, or definitely the top 5, let alone in the first round. So, we're gonna reel it in. I've rambled a lot. I know you're about to you have something you wanna say too, but I think we can all reel it in and just wait to see how this plays out. If they get rid of him in the offseason, then this was a waste and everyone needs to get fired. If it's
Ye-
just a reset and start again next year with him, or maybe they bring him back in if they're out of contention, not the end of the world. But if he can't, if this mentally destroys his confidence where he can never play again, per se, or he can never rebound from it, then I don't think he's gonna be the guy in the first place because guys have had to overcome a lot more than this before. So we'll see. But sorry, you were gonna say something.
well, I think you're talking about a lot about confidence and things like that for Anthony Richardson. I don't think it's a confidence thing with him. I don't think it's a confidence thing from the coaching staff. I think the coaching staff sees the dynamic ability of him, but I think there's a growing concern around his injuries. He
100%.
has played. I'm pulling it up right now, so I'm not messing this up. In his career in the NFL, he has
10
played
games,
not even 10 games. Yeah, just now 10 games. He just played his 10th game.
and he's
Complete
left for
games,
5 of them.
he's yeah, I was gonna say complete games, he's played half of those.
Mhm.
And so in those games, he's had four injuries that have landed him on an injury report. 3 of those 4 injuries have made him miss games. And depending on how you take this wrist thing, which he was holding it constantly during the game, especially the third and fourth quarters, that could be 4 for 4. We're talking about the same guy who's missed seasons at a time in college as well. So there's potential for there to be growing concern around his playing style being effective for long-term health in the NFL, in my eyes. And we talked prior to the season with one of our good friends, former Belly Up Sports guy, Brian Scott from the Injured Lister podcast, about that AC joint strain. And this was one of the concerns that he had, and he's a doctor, so he does know these things when it comes down to it. He actually deals with these type of injuries regularly. At any point in time, that injury can hurt itself right now. According to the injury tracker, he has a 40.4% chance of re injuring that shoulder every week, which is considered low with the exception of his shoulder. Like he has a 40% chance of getting injured every single week just because of pre existing injuries. And despite all of the issues elsewhere that we're seeing, again, he is 22 years old. He has played one full college season. And realistically, let's take those 10 games, the 5 he's left early, let's combine them together. He has played 7.5 games of NFL football. He has played one less game than Jaden Daniels at this point in time.
He
One
has
and a half.
less passing attempts than Caleb Williams. Less
And
dropbacks, I should say.
and he has not had an offensive line that's performed well throughout that time. They
They're
performed
ranked
decent
they're
at
ranked number
times.
they're ranked number 3 this year. Like, they've been pretty solid this year.
Through the first 5 weeks last year, they were not that good. And
Ranked okay,
they
yeah.
had the 17th lowest ranking in the week he got injured this season with the hip injury. So, yes, they've been decent this year. They've been a top 10 overall offensive line this year, but they have moments, just like all teams do. But unfortunately for Anthony Richardson, he can't afford for this team to have those moments when he's trying to stay healthy and for the coaching staff. So I think if we take all the other playing abilities away, like just take those out and just look at pure health of your quarterback, I think that's a bigger concern that they're realizing, hey, this guy is 22 years old and he's had now three major injuries to cause missed time, and then a fourth injury that we're gonna say he's gonna miss time for based on the fact he's getting benched, leaving performance out of it. So 4 injuries, the minimum of 4 missed games in that situation. It's not looking good, especially when you have played a combined 7.5 total games here. It's it doesn't look good for that situation. And that's what I think more of all of this needs to be kind of addressed with him is they have to figure out a way so he stays healthy, whether that's changing his training program, doing what it takes, having him work with somebody who is as big and strong as he was when he was a quarterback in Cam Newton and seeing how Cam was able to prevent himself from getting major injuries like that while he was scrambling and running over people. Because Cam did it well. His whole entire first tenure at Carolina, he stayed out of the injury tent as much as possible, as much as a quarterback you can imagine being 6'5", 265 pounds, running at somebody, maybe 270, probably 290 if we're being honest. But it's it's something with AR we need to look at that I think the Colts have to reevaluate. If you are going to make him your franchise quarterback, you have to evaluate how you're going to keep him healthy. You can't just let him go out there and Andrew Luck it anymore. And I know that might hit Colts fans deep in the heart there. I'm sorry, but it's the truth. Andrew Luck was the guy that put his body on the line every single play. You can't afford to have that happen yet again with another supposed franchise quarterback. And that's, I think, where the Colts need to just full stop and look at that. And I think that's what they're doing. I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. I've made fun of Jim Irsay 1,001 times. I'm going to try to give him the benefit of the doubt here. But I also think that James Steichen needs to take a look at his offense and maybe figure out how he can effectively change his offense to keep AR healthy as well. And in the meantime, just run Flacco out there, let Flacco go ball, and get you guys in the playoffs potentially. So yeah, I don't hate it, but at the same time, I think this is a bigger thing for injuries more than it's performance based, just because of his age. I think they knew it was going to be rough, and I don't think there was any doubt about that. It's just a matter of figuring out how rough it was going to be, and if you can, readjust the ship, if you will. And I think that's what this is. I think this is a readjustment of the ship, and they're going to see what they can do going long term with him versus, all right, we're going to win now type of mentality. Maybe they're just like, all right, we can win enough, make everybody happy, keep him on the team that needs to be there, and maybe attract some free agents to come play with AR as this mystical character who's on the bench now and maybe comes in for 3 or 4 plays a game. Like, that's what I think is going to happen, and I hope it's what's going to happen because the Colts are going to finally figure out how to use him long term. But for right now, I'm hoping it's not a performance based issue because we haven't seen enough of them to really call it a performance based issue. If we're being fair,
I'll say too, what I think is, I think that injury thing is, I think that was the one wrench in the entire thing they weren't ready for as well. Because let's say he's doing this last year. Okay, this was fully anticipated. Like if they went 6 games last year with him doing this, they would have been like, "Holy cow!" If they were 4-4 at any point, we would have been like, "Oh, this guy might be the truth," even if it looks erratic.
yeah,
He's played more NFL games than college games at this point. If this was the case last year, problem is like you mentioned, he has been knocked out of 5 games or banged up in 5 games. His entire play style involves running the football, and every time he has gotten injured, it was on a run play. It wasn't someone rolled up on his ankle in the pocket or someone like what happened with Cam Newton when TJ Watt pulled his arm out of the socket when he was throwing it. It wasn't anything like that. It was while he was running, the concussion, the leg against Jacksonville, Minka Fitzpatrick destroying his oblique, the shoulder injury on a read option. You com- you kind of take away his entire game. You brought him in there to use the quarterback run game, throw the ball down the field, screw his completion percentage in the meantime because he can't really hit the intermediate routes right now consistently unless he's somehow randomly rifling it into a window that's the size of a semi truck, or if and he can't really get through those 1, 2, 3s balls not on target necessarily. He can rip it 60, but then when you take away the run game, they're just like, all right, a 60-yard bomb is not a very high effective play. If you hit one of those a game, you're going to go 3 and out the rest of the game. We will deal with that. And I think teams kind of figure that out quickly after week 1. So I
yeah,
think that's part of the issue. And then I think Shane tried. You drafted him for this offense. He can't stay healthy in this offense. You take a different offense, he can't run that offense. It's like I think they're stuck in a conundrum of like, all right, how can we adjust this? And we can't just keep throwing him out there to get slaughtered because then he's going to get hurt again. At least this way, you're more or less guaranteeing he will get practice reps, which is better than nothing. And at
yeah,
the same time, I think they do want to win. The worst thing that happened was winning 9 games with Gardner Minshew and a host of injuries last year because the expectations,
yeah.
unfortunately, like, okay, let's run it back with a dynamic quarterback who looked so good in small action. And then unfortunately, as soon as they start getting a groove, like against that in the start of the Steelers game, he looked good. That offense had kind of started to get going. He was ripping some throws, running the ball, gets hurt. And then suddenly you have to readjust everything as well because you can't run that offense with Joe Flacco. Even though he did hit 21 miles per hour on one of his scrambles this year, Joe Flacco's not doing that every single play again. So,
5 yards.
oh, he got 15 on that one. It was a
I
weird,
know, no,
stupid.
but the 21 was for 5 yards.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, then it dropped down to 14 real quick. But
Yeah,
I
I,
just it's a weird conundrum because you can't run the offense that's built for him because of the injuries, and he can't run a different offense because his skill set currently does not allow that. So you can't run. He came like Steichen was in San Diego with Justin Herbert his early years. You can't run that offense, and we loved watching that offense. We got to see that in person. That was beautiful. You can't run that with him, unfortunately. You can run the deep backside post, but that's about it. You can't run the Jalen Hurts offense he was excited to run because A, they don't have AJ Brown necessarily. That makes it very easy. And B, every time you run it, he gets hurt. You're stuck in a weird conundrum. So I agree with you. I think this is the all right, let's reset. Let's give him some time to let's let him clear his head. Because I can't imagine it feels good to go out there and complete 44% of your passes on the season and constantly be reminded of it. Especially at 22 years old, the weight of the world on your shoulders. That can't feel good.
Well, and coming
Like
out of
that's
college
gotta
in
take
Florida too,
like
that
you've
doesn't help
heard
it
it your
either.
entire life, like you can't complete passes. That's gotta be exhausting. And I think we saw that a bit in that post-game press conference, a little frustration where he had to like, I'm the best running quarterback, not named Lamar Jackson, just because I do it differently. Like stuff you don't normally say in the in those situations. So yeah, I think he'll be 23 next year. Let's relax. Let's see what happens. If they try and get rid of him in the offseason for a 6th round pick or something and a pick swap, then there's an issue and people need to get fired.
Yeah,
If they draft a quarterback in round 1 and be like, "Oh, they're gonna compete with AR," people need to get fired. If this is something where the head coach, the GM, and all of them are just like, "Look, we gotta reset this a little bit because right now, what we wanted to do is not gonna work. We have to find and plan B is he can't run plan B at this point. Let's formulate a plan C without tanking, unforced because they've won too many games to properly tank with how many bad teams there are in the league right now. There is 10 teams with 2 wins or less. Like, it's a long ways to go, and
yeah,
I guess you could kinda tank, but, like, they're not what are they gonna tank for a quarterback? You have your quarterback is what you so that's why it's a weird scenario,
a
unless you don't want
receiver,
that. Just another receiver for, like, the 4th year in a row draft one, I
an
suppose, like,
actual dynamic receiver, not just a guy that runs fast and is really tall.
hey, Josh Downs is pretty darn good.
I'm not to make fun of Josh Downs, but I do want to say that I want to address the intermediate passing thing. I don't know if it's honestly not that he can't hit them, or if he throws the ball too damn hard for his receivers to be able to catch the ball in the intermediate. I don't think he has the touch needed to hit those intermediate routes, and I think that's the difference here between him and you mentioned Justin Herbert, who I was going to compare him to is Justin Herbert coming out of college had the ability to drop it in over the top of a linebacker and in front of a corner. Anthony Richardson throws the ball on the line. He is too Aaron Rodgers-y for his own good, which Aaron Rodgers is a perfect example coming out of college. Didn't necessarily have the ability to throw an intermediate ball. And everybody's like, oh, well, his first year playing quarterback is after Brett Favre. He was great. Yeah, let's not forget he sat
4
on the
years,
bench
sir.
for 4 years.
And
Four, including a broken leg year. The guy did not play but wash up time in his career behind Brett Favre. And then he got that ability because he learned from somebody who was very similar to the way he throws. Joe Flacco also came out of college throwing line drives, had a great arm, struggled intermediate. Guess what he picked up really quickly? How to throw the intermediate passes. And I don't think Anthony Richardson's been allowed to have that moment of growth because you're throwing him out there, you're not starting him, you're not benching him, you're starting him immediately. Then he gets hurt. He can't throw the ball for an entire season. So 13, 14 games, whatever it was last year. And then he comes back, and again, you're going back to the same offense of running the ball, and you're not practicing in between, of 20 yards and 10 yards away from the line of scrimmage. You're practicing 10-yard and under throws, and you're practicing 20 and over throws. You're not hitting anything in between. And when you do run them, you're running sit routes in the middle of the field that like a receiver like Josh Downs isn't going to get open as well as somebody like Michael Pittman, who, while at the same time he's a good receiver, he's not going to separate from anybody, and that's not something Anthony Richardson's used to, is having to thread that needle yet. And again, less than 20 games worth of practice in the regular season here going into it. It's not exactly something that gets picked up early on. So I think that's part of all the conversations too that needs to be had here is he is yet to pick up the skills necessary. And I think people need to recognize again, like we have not had enough time of Anthony Richardson on field and practicing to really give a fair assessment of skills. We can see the trajectory right now, and we're like, okay, pause. Let's not do that. Let's readjust this. And I think that's where I really hope that's where the Colts are at. They're not trying to pull a fast one. And if you are,
people
Dallas
need to
keep
get
Dak, bring in AR, send away whoever Cooper Rush to go sit behind Joe Flacco. I don't care. Let Anthony Richardson sit on the bench for 2 years behind Dak, which Dak can do one thing and one thing well, and that is drop it over the top of a linebacker and in front of a safety every time. Learn that ability and then go out there and dominate because that's all he's missing from his passing game that's realistic and something he can learn in a season. You
He
know,
definitely needs to get those feet together too, because those
yeah,
he will tap dance. I think that's where those misfires come as well too. Like when he sails it high, it's because your foot's facing left and you're throwing right. Little things you'll get over time. I think the biggest issue you mentioned practice. Not being able to practice last year hurt more than not playing in games. I
Yeah.
think that's it because you learn a lot in practice. You learn in games, obviously, no one's saying that. It's nothing competes with live games, but practice is not far behind. You get more practice time than you get game time. So that's where I think the only thing that kinda sucks is they did it this week with the tap out situation. So now it looks
Yeah.
now it's like a now it's an avalanche, unfortunately. If they probably if they'd have pulled it at halftime against Houston, maybe. I don't know. They just the timing of it kinda stinks, but we spent a lot of time on this. Basically, we're both in it sounds like we have different routes again, they're both in agreeance. Hopefully, this isn't the end of AR in Indy because that would just be that means the Jeff Saturday experience was for nothing, and it hasn't even been 1,000 days yet. So, like, at that point, what are we doing? But I don't think Joe Flacco starting is the end of the world, and I think we're both
Well,
kind of in the same
You got
agreement
Josh Downs. That's what you got out of it.
in the 3rd round with the pick you already had. Like, it's like, "Alright, congrats." But, yeah, we'll s it's gonna be interesting to see. One thing that is for sure, though, go pick up Josh Downs in your fantasy league if he's available because Joe Flacco loves him some Josh Downs, and those routes that Anthony isn't quite as comfortable with yet, that's where Josh Downs likes to feast, and Joe Flacco was featuring him in those games where they were healthy together. So, granted, Josh Downs feasts with both of them, but it's a little bit more consistent feeding with Joe Flacco. So definitely go pick him up if you haven't. But